Hey everyone, Kevin here, and since its release I can safely say that I am obsessed with Marvel Rivals. It's easily my most played game of the year so far, and I've been loving the variety of characters you can play as well as the release schedule of the past 3 seasons so far. That being said, I'm also an insane comic nerd, and one new character a month isn't enough for me. This leads into another one of my favorite things that have come from this game, and that's fan art. Rivals has such a unique and stylish look to it that plenty of people have been reimagining other Marvel characters and even some DC characters in the Rival style. And so now about 3.5 seasons in, I decided it's my turn to throw my hat in the ring. So with that, I decided to say, fine, I'll do it myself. Today, come join me as I'm going to implement one of the biggest Marvel villains in recent history and present my take on how the Mad Titan himself might work in the game. Let's go. Now, this piece is different than any other one I've done in the past, and so I spent a decent amount of time researching the Marvel Rival style itself to make sure I captured it well. Thankfully, given how popular he is, there are a few other people that have done their own versions of Thanos that I was able to analyze along with his comic counterparts so I could figure out how I wanted to design him myself. Some of my favorites include TinMan888's version of MCU Thanos on Reddit, and Jackson Kaspers's rendition of God King Thanos on Instagram. I especially love Jackson's version based on the older King Thanos from the comics. And if he hadn't already made this, I probably would have done something very similar with mine. But in the interest of making something wholly unique, I tried to take elements of all of these different versions and use them to create something new. I had a bit of help from Tom O'Clock's video breaking down the style of Marvel Rivals as well, where he used his own research to make a Rivals version of Jubilee. If you're interested in all the style of Rivals, especially if you want to try something like this out, I highly recommend checking out his video as well as the other artists, which will all be linked in the description below. One of the things that I found to be the case with Rivals is that the character designs are very exaggerated, similar to how their comic counterparts would be portrayed. Typically there are a few main elements of a character that are emphasized so that they capture your attention better, and I feel this is part of what makes the Rivals art style so unique. Therefore, I opted to focus on Thanos' big muscular frame, similar to how the Hulk and the Thing are portrayed, and of course the Infinity Gauntlet itself. To help sell his stature as a cosmic warlord, I also added some bulkier armor plates, which I think makes his silhouette very unique compared to other characters with a similar build. Another detail I added was making the skin a bit bumpier in an effort to give his expression a bit more grit, in line with how Rivals adds a lot more small, technical details to a character's design in general. Some other details I added were the waist cape, with fur at the base resembling a king's cloak, these tubes of cosmic energy that look like they power the armor, and of course a king's crown to tie the whole look together. My goal with this concept was ultimately to make it look like this version of Thanos came from a timeline where he succeeded in his plans to conquer the universe. So naturally he has the look of a man with hundreds of planets under his boot by now. One of a few small issues I had, as you can see, was the fact that I originally tried to add another plate or similar piece of cloth to the cloak in the front of his belt. But I just couldn't decide on a version of that idea that I thought looked good, so I opted for a big belt buckle instead. The other ideas ended up taking too much attention away from the most important details like the gauntlet in my opinion. At least I made the buckle loosely based on a skull shape as well to allude to his obsession with death, so I think that worked out for the best in the end. And as far as the colors go, they're largely the same as what you would see in a comic version of Thanos. Of course his skin is still purple, and his suit is golden blue. However, the difference is that I tried to make the metal especially brighter to make him look that much more opulent. The coloring process itself is a bit backwards compared to what I would normally do. Typically I would draw the line art and then use that as the basis for my coloring process. But Marvel Rivals doesn't use very much line art, mainly just for highlighting specific details, so what I did here after sketching Thanos was I blocked out each individual color and began painting details in. After that, I added the line art in certain areas like his face and smaller areas in the armor. After setting the colors and painting him, the last step to my process was adding highlights and finishing touches. These are some final details that contribute to why the Rivals style is so unique. If you look closely at the model art for these characters, you'll see that they have these overlapping sketchy lines that make the characters look more like they came straight off a comic page. On top of that, they also have these very distinct highlights using bold whites as well as bright pinks and blues, almost appearing like chromatic aberration. I think adding these in was some of the most fun I had with the piece. After going back and forth with myself trying to decide how I wanted Thanos to look, I was finally able to let go a bit and draw based on how I felt, since these details are very free-formed without much precision needed. Now, on top of the details for the concept itself, I imagine some of you are probably wondering if I've considered what Thanos would do in the game. And I can answer that very simply by saying, yes I have. Given his massive frame, Thanos would definitely need to be a vanguard that's able to tank a bunch of damage. I figure he would be similar to other melee vanguards like Hulk, Cap, or Groot, where his role would be as a central anchor to the team. He would likely jump in, deal as much damage as he can while disrupting the enemy team, and try to control the battle as best as possible. Now, at this point, given the fact that I've drawn him with the Infinity Gauntlet, there is no doubt his kit would need to include the stones in some way. But because each of them has a wide range of effects that basically let him bend reality like a god, I tried to simplify the kit by assigning each ability to one of the stones. Now, I should also preface this by saying I'm an idea guy and not a balancing guy. The ideas I have could be supremely broken for all I know, but then again, would that really be anything new for this game? First off, his primary fire would be assigned to the Power Stone, an ability I call Cosmic Clash. Like I said before, his main attack would be a melee combo empowered by the cosmic force of the gauntlet. The added effect of the Power Stone would be that consecutive successful attacks would also build up more damage over time. I figure this would create a 3 to 5 hit chain at its highest. But that also means if you miss or stop your combo, that damage buff reverts and you start from scratch. It's a small, simple boost to your main attack, but I think it's a good way of showing off the Power Stone's abilities at least. Thanos' secondary attack, on the other hand, would use the Reality Stone to channel an ability I call Transmuter Field. This would allow Thanos to absorb incoming fire directly in front of him for a couple of seconds and quickly redistribute that accumulated damage as shields for himself and any allies directly around him. This is similar to how Magneto's Meteor functions, but on a much smaller scale. I figure you could probably balance this by modifying the cooldown or capping off how much extra health you can give. But I just like this way of portraying the Reality Stone. It's reminiscent of how he used it in the movies by basically transforming attacks out of existence. Next up we have Thanos' first ability, which I call Spatial Jaunt. This one obviously uses the Space Stone, and I added it as his biggest means of maneuvering around the field as he won't be very fast otherwise. Again, much like it's used in films, this stone allows Thanos to teleport across distances with ease. In-game, this would translate to him dashing forward a decent amount of space as he phases through reality to a point he can see ahead of him. Because it would be a pretty simple dash, I imagine it would be one of those abilities a character can use a couple of times as it's charging. So maybe Thanos would get a stack of 2 of those that he can use to either dash in and around combat, or for escaping if needed. Speaking of escaping, that's largely what his second ability is for, an escape hatch I like to call Retrace Fate. In contrast to the previous entry, this one uses the power of the Time Stone to rewind Thanos a few seconds back to wherever he was previously, reclaiming any lost health in the process. For those that are familiar with Overwatch, this is essentially Tracer's recall. However, despite that, I wanted to make this ability a reference to how the stone allows the user to wind time backwards and forwards. Besides, with how many hero shooters are on the market, you're bound to see a bit of overlap. I mean, as someone who used to play Overwatch, the first week or so of trying out Rivals was finding abilities I recognized from Overwatch, and using that prior experience to learn the game. Anyway, the next ability I'm going to cover is one of those more situational powers that has a longer cooldown than the others. This one I call Thanos' Devastator Cannon, and it uses the powers of the Mind Stone. This one was a bit harder to come up with, not because I was struggling to get ideas, but mostly because the telepathic ones I came up with didn't fit his kit as a vanguard in my opinion. So instead, I settled on a long-range beam of energy like the kind Vision would create using the Mind Stone. This I think would deal some decent damage and give the added effects of slowing the target and breaking the environment at a faster rate than your average attacks. One of the things that made Rivals stand out to me when I first tried it was the destructible environments, and yet I haven't really seen a character that takes full advantage of that yet. So I thought giving Thanos this ability would allow him to quickly finish off enemies trying to escape, or give a sniper trying to hide on a balcony a really bad time, for example. Like I said though, this would have a longer cooldown because my version of Thanos is primarily close range, and this long range beam is just meant to act as a little bonus you can use every now and then. Now for his passive ability, I used the last of the stones to create a feature called Soul Force Siphon, of course referencing the Soul Stone. This ability gives Thanos a Soul Force gauge that builds up a charge from 0 to 100% as he keeps dealing damage. If he's not dealing damage for a few seconds, the gauge starts to drop, similar to how Emma Frost's primary attack works. However, when the gauge hits 100, Thanos becomes supercharged by the Soul Stone and gains a health buff and lifesteal for his attacks. The idea is that as he fights, he is literally using the stone to drain the life force of his enemies. This supercharged state would last for maybe another 10 seconds or so before dropping, and the cycle repeats itself. Finally, we have to talk about Thanos' ultimate ability, but you may have noticed I've run out of stones. So what would the ability be then? Well, you see, naturally, Thanos would jump in the Thanoscopter, fly up in the air, and dive bomb the enemy team into the dirt. I'm kidding, of course, it's obviously the snap. But can you imagine if they actually put that in the game, though? Anyway, this finishing move is one I call Inevitability, in reference to his signature quote from Endgame. Once activated, Thanos summons the powers of all 6 stones to deliver a devastating attack, much like Wanda's Reality Erasure. However, instead of an AoE like her ultimate, I made Thanos' ultimate a bit more targeted in its approach. He would jump into the air upon triggering the ability, at which point he would start charging up over a few seconds. Thanos wouldn't be able to move in this state, but he can still move the reticle to aim where he wants the attack to land. This gives the opposing team a brief window to react while Thanos plans out where he wants the charge to go off. And once it does, the gauntlet unleashes a huge cylinder of cosmic energy pointed at wherever he's aiming, dealing massive damage and reducing anyone it kills to dust. So, with all that in mind, the general strategy for playing my take on Thanos would amount to leading the team as a group by getting in the fray using a jaunt, dealing as much consistent damage as possible to build up your Cosmic Clash combo and Soul Force gauge, then escape using another jaunt, retrace, or transmute to sustain yourself. All this leads to getting a well-placed ultimate that devastates the entire team and prevents them from recovering. I'm really satisfied with how this idea came together, so as I finish up the arc portion as well, let's see the Mad Titan in all his glory. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that little experiment as much as I did. Marvel Rivals is such a fun game, and I've had a blast with all the consistent content the devs have been releasing for it. And I had such a fun time trying to replicate their style as well. Feel free to let me know what you think of my version of Thanos here, as well as who you're hoping gets added to the game. And while you're at it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're interested in seeing more art content like this from me. But regardless, I hope you have a nice rest of your day, and I will see you again next time, because I am inevitable.